The afternoon sun bathed the imposing facade of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. As Beatrice Adler walked through the revolving glass doors, her heels echoing on the polished marble of the lobby. At 73, she maintained the upright posture and steady gaze of someone who had built a real estate empire from scratch. But at that moment, her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the leather portfolio containing her test results. The doctor had been clear. She would need constant monitoring, drastic lifestyle changes, words that echoed in her mind like warning bells. Beatrice adjusted the Hermes silk scarf at her neck and walked toward the exit, ignoring the curious glances of other patients who recognized the famous businesswoman from the society pages. She was almost at the door when a sudden movement caught her attention. A small child, dressed in ragged, dirty clothes, was running toward her with surprising speed. The hospital security guards moved to intercept, but the girl was faster. Joanna was about 10 years old, with tangled brown hair and bright green eyes that contrasted with the smudges of dirt on her thin face. She stopped abruptly in front of Beatrice, breathless, pointing a trembling finger at the older woman's right hand. "That ring! You took it from my grandmother. That was her ring," she shouted, her thin voice cutting through the polite murmur of the lobby. Beatrice instinctively recoiled, her hand flying to her chest. The ring on her right hand was a vintage white gold piece with 3 small diamonds, delicate and discreet, something she had worn for so many years she had almost forgotten its origin. "Little girl, you're mistaken," Beatrice replied, her voice controlled though her heart began to race. "This ring has been mine for many years." The security guards finally reached the child, each grabbing one of her arms, but Joanna struggled with a strength surprising for her size. "I'm not mistaken," she insisted, tears beginning to roll down her dirty cheeks. "My grandmother told me all about this ring. It has an engraving on the inside, 3 tiny stars on the left side and the initials M and L intertwined on the right. You can look, please. Just look." Beatrice's world seemed to tilt dangerously. She felt the blood drain from her face. Those details, that specific engraving, were invisible to the naked eye for anyone who simply glanced at the ring. Only someone who had held it, examined it closely, would know that intimate secret. Her legs gave out, and the last thing she saw before everything went dark was the girl's desperate face as the guard's arms pulled her away. When Beatrice regained consciousness, she was lying on a gurney in the hospital's emergency room. A nurse was checking her vitals while a young doctor examined her pupils with a penlight. Her son, Ryan Adler, stood beside her, his face etched with worry, his impeccable Italian suit a stark contrast to the clinical environment. "Mom, you gave us a terrible scare," Ryan said, holding her hand. "What happened down there?" Beatrice blinked several times, organizing her jumbled thoughts. "The girl. Where is the girl?" "What girl, Mom? That street kid who tried to mug you. Security already removed her from the hospital. She's probably at the precinct by now." "No." Beatrice sat up abruptly, ignoring the doctor's protest. "It wasn't a mugging. Bring that child here, immediately." Ryan frowned, confused, but he knew his mother's tone of voice well enough not to argue when she used that particular timbre. After a series of calls and tense conversations with hospital security, they discovered the girl hadn't been taken to the police. Instead, she was waiting outside, sitting on the curb, refusing to leave. Half an hour later, Joanna was sitting in a chair in the private room where Beatrice had been transferred. The child seemed even smaller in that setting, her bare feet dangling without reaching the floor. Ryan remained leaning against the wall, arms crossed, observing the scene with obvious suspicion. Beatrice removed the ring from her right hand for the first time in 15 years and held it up to the light. With trembling fingers, she turned the piece until she found the inside of the band. There, exactly as the girl had described, were the 3 tiny stars and the initials M and L intertwined in a delicate design she herself had commissioned decades ago. "How do you know about this engraving?" Beatrice asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Joanna wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "My grandma showed me," she said simply. "She kept a picture of this ring in a little metal box. It was the only beautiful thing she had left from when she worked in a big mansion. She used to tell me her boss was very kind, that they were real friends, and that this ring was a gift for years of loyalty and affection. My initials are on there, see? J for Joanna and L for her grandmother, my great-grandmother Louise, who was already gone when I was born. Beatrice felt a sharp pain in her chest that had nothing to do with her heart condition. Those initials weren't J and L, they were M and L. But the story, the context, the perfect description of the ring, it all pointed to a single person in her entire life. "What is your grandmother's name?" Beatrice asked, though she already knew the answer before the word left the child's lips. Mariana. Mariana Morales. The name dropped like a bomb in the silent room. Ryan stiffened, his eyes widening for a moment before he resumed his controlled expression. Beatrice closed her eyes, memories flooding her mind like a broken dam. Mariana had been her housekeeper for nearly 20 years. More than that, she had been her confidant, her friend, the only person Beatrice trusted completely during the turbulent years after losing her husband. Mariana knew all the Adler family secrets, every weakness, every vulnerability. And then, 15 years ago, it had all fallen apart. The gossip had started circulating in New York's social circles. Intimate details about Beatrice's business dealings, about the temporary financial difficulties she was facing, about Ryan's personal problems, all of it popping up in drawing room conversations and gossip columns. The trail always led back to Mariana. Witnesses claimed to have seen her talking to journalists. Others swore she was selling information to business competitors. Beatrice hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but the evidence mounted. The whispers became shouts, and finally, pressured by Ryan and the family lawyers, she fired Mariana. No references, no letter of recommendation, just a month's salary and an order to never show her face again. The ring had been a gift given months before the firing, in a moment of genuine gratitude. Beatrice had never asked for it back. And now this child, this granddaughter, stood before her with the physical proof of that shattered friendship. "Where is your grandmother now?" Beatrice asked, her voice thick with an emotion she could no longer control. Joanna looked down, her small hands clutching the hem of her dirty t-shirt. "I don't know. She left 2 years ago. She left a letter saying she was a burden to me and my mum, that we deserved better. The letter said she was going to find a place where she could start over, where nobody knew her name. She left this ring with me, said one day it would be for something good. And your mother, where is she?" Joanna hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost inaudible. "My mom's not here anymore. She got really sick, and we didn't have money for the good medicine, only for the generics that didn't work right. After Grandma left, I was alone. I've been living on the street since then, doing odd jobs, asking for help. But I always look for Grandma. I ask everyone. I show them her picture that I keep right here." The girl pulled a piece of laminated paper from inside her shirt, tied around her neck with a grimy string. It was an old, faded photo, but Beatrice immediately recognized Mariana's face, smiling, hugging a younger woman who must have been her daughter, and holding a baby who could only be Joanna. Ryan finally spoke, his voice tense. "Mom, this is obviously a scam. The girl probably stole that photo, made up some sob story to exploit your generosity. You're emotionally vulnerable because of your tests today. Don't let her take advantage of you." But Beatrice wasn't listening. She looked into Joanna's green eyes and saw something there that made her question everything she had believed for the last 15 years. They were the same eyes as Mariana's, the same unshakable determination, the same wounded dignity fighting to stay upright against all odds. "Ryan is right about one thing," Beatrice said finally, making her son relax for a moment until she continued. "You shouldn't be on the streets. You're coming home with me." "What?" Ryan exclaimed, pushing himself off the wall. "Mom, have you lost your mind? You're going to bring a street kid into our home based on some fantasy story about a ring?" Beatrice turned to her son, and there was something in her eyes that made him instinctively recoil. "This story isn't a fantasy, and you know that as well as I do. That ring was my gift to Mariana, and those engravings are real. If there's a chance, just one small chance, that I made a terrible mistake 15 years ago, then I need to investigate. And in the meantime, This child will not spend another night on the street. It's decided." Ryan opened his mouth to protest again, but something in his mother's face made him stop. It was an expression he hadn't seen in a long time, a determination that reminded him of the woman who had built an empire against all expectations. He gave a stiff nod and left the room, his exit punctuated by the sharp sound of the door closing. Joanna looked at Beatrice with a mixture of hope and suspicion, like a wounded animal unsure whether to trust the outstretched hand. "Why are you doing this?" Beatrice took the girl's small, dirty hand in her own carefully manicured ones. "Because, my child, I may owe your grandmother much more than a ring, and if it's true, if I destroyed an innocent woman's life by believing lies, then I need to find a way to fix it. But first, you need a bath, clean clothes, and a decent meal. Then we'll talk more." That night, as Joanna slept in one of the guest rooms of the Adler mansion, for the first time in years with a soft pillow under her head and a warm blanket over her body, Beatrice stayed awake in her study. Before her was a dusty file box she hadn't opened in 15 years, containing all the documents related to Mariana's dismissal. She opened the first folder and began to read, looking not for what was there but for what should have been and wasn't. And the more she read, the more an uneasy feeling grew in her stomach, a terrible intuition that perhaps the true story of that old scandal was about to emerge from the shadows, bringing with it revelations that would change everything. Morning arrived with the sound of birds singing in the garden of the Adler mansion, but Beatrice didn't notice. She had spent the entire night poring over the old documents, and what she found, or rather what she didn't find, disturbed her deeply. The papers contained vague accusations, third-party testimonies that were never verified, and a series of coincidences that seemed carefully orchestrated. There wasn't a single piece of concrete proof that Mariana had leaked any information. The sound of bare feet on the marble hallway made Beatrice lift her head. Joanna appeared at the study door, wearing a pajama set Beatrice had improvised from one of her own T-shirts, which was far too big for the girl and reached her ankles. Despite the previous night's bath and her now clean, combed hair, the child still had that cautious look of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "Good morning," Beatrice said softly, closing the folder she was reading. "Did you sleep well?" Joanna nodded shyly, entering the study slowly, as if expecting someone to kick her out at any moment. "It was the softest bed I've ever slept in. I thought it was a dream when I woke up. Are you really going to let me stay?" Beatrice stood up, her bones protesting after a night spent sitting in the same position, and walked over to the girl. "Yes, you'll stay for as long as necessary. But I need you to tell me everything about your grandmother, about what happened after she left here." They sat together on the leather sofa in the study, and Joanna began to tell her story. The words came out slowly, as if each memory was a wound that hurt to touch. She told of how Mariana never managed to get another good job after leaving the mansion. The other employers in New York's high society had heard the rumors about her being a gossip, someone who couldn't keep secrets. Mariana ended up taking menial jobs, heavy cleaning in offices at night, anything that paid enough to support her daughter and granddaughter. "But the poverty wasn't the worst part," Joanna said, wiping away a tear that insisted on falling. "It was watching my grandma lose the light in her eyes. She had always been so proud, so dignified, and suddenly she would shrink when she saw high society people on the street, lower her head, ashamed to exist. My mom tried to cheer her up, but she was getting sick too. The medicine was too expensive, and we didn't have good health insurance. And then, one day, 2 years ago, you came home and found only a letter." Joanna pulled a carefully folded piece of paper from her pajama pocket, protected by clear plastic. She handed it to Beatrice with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably Mariana's, that elegant cursive script Beatrice recognized from hundreds of shopping lists and notes left around the house. "My dearest Joanna," the letter read, "forgive this cowardly grandmother for not having the courage to say goodbye in person. I see in your eyes and your mother's the burden I represent. You deserve a chance to start over without carrying the weight of my stained name. I'm going far away where no one knows me, and I will try to build something new." One day, when you are grown and can understand, know that everything I did, including leaving, was for love. The ring I leave with you was a gift from someone who once believed in me. Keep it, as a reminder that there was a time when I was worthy of trust. With all my love, your grandmother Mariana. Beatrice finished reading with misty eyes. She recognized in the letter the deep pain of a woman who had lost not just her livelihood, but her very identity. And if Mariana was innocent, if that noble and loyal woman had been sacrificed by a cruel conspiracy, then Beatrice was partly responsible for that destruction. The study door opened abruptly, and Ryan entered, dressed for work, his face a mask of restrained irritation. "Mom, we need to talk. In private." Beatrice stood up, motioning for Joanna to stay put. "You can speak in front of her, Ryan. She has the right to hear anything related to her family." Ryan clenched his jaw but continued. "My lawyer called me. Apparently you're planning to reopen the Mariana case. Mom, this is insane. It was 15 years ago. Even if there was something wrong, what's the point of digging up the past now?" "The point, Ryan, is to do what's right. If we committed an injustice, we need to correct it." Ryan glanced at Joanna with an expression the girl couldn't decipher, something between guilt and defensiveness. "And you're going to do that based on the word of a child who might have been coached to tell this story? Think of your reputation, our family's reputation." "My reputation was built on honesty and fairness in business, or so I thought. If I find out it was built on the unjust ruin of an innocent woman, then it's not worth anything anyway." Ryan was silent for a long moment, then turned and left, slamming the door hard enough to make the pictures on the walls tremble. Joanna looked at Beatrice with a mix of admiration and concern. "You don't have to do this for me. I don't want to cause trouble between you and your son." Beatrice stroked the girl's hair. "The problems between Ryan and me are older than you know, dear. But for now, let's have breakfast. Afterwards, I have some people to talk to." Later that morning, Beatrice summoned all the long-time household staff who still worked for her. There were only 3: Mrs. Peterson, the cook who had been with the family for 30 years, Miller, the driver and groundskeeper, and Lucy, a maid who had started as Mariana's assistant. Anne stayed on after her dismissal. They gathered in the living room, clearly nervous about the formal summons. Beatrice got straight to the point. "I need you to be completely honest with me about Mariana. What really happened back then? Did any of you truly believe she was leaking family information?" The 3 exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was Mrs. Peterson who finally spoke, her voice heavy with years of silent weight. "Mrs. Adler, with all due respect, none of us ever believed that. Mariana was the most loyal person I've ever known. She defended this family as if it were her own. Many times when Mr. Ryan was younger and got into trouble, she was the one who protected him, who shielded him from you so he wouldn't get a lecture." Miller leaned forward, his thick hands clasped. "I always thought it was strange how that gossip started, Mrs. Adler. It seemed almost coordinated, you know. Suddenly several people in society started talking at the same time, all saying they heard from reliable sources that Mariana was spilling secrets. But when you tried to find out who those sources were, nobody could ever say for sure." Lucy hesitated before speaking, biting her lower lip. "There's something I never told you, Mrs. Adler. At the time, right before the gossip started, I saw Mr. Ryan talking a lot with that group of his friends, the ones who always came here for parties. I overheard a conversation where they were talking about how to make someone lose their credibility in society. I thought they were talking about some business rival, but now, thinking back, the timing was very suspicious." Beatrice felt the blood run cold in her veins. Ryan had been only 22 at the time, an immature, spoiled young man, who had always shown jealousy of the close relationship between her and Mariana. But was he capable of something so cruel? Did anyone else notice anything strange back then? Mrs. Peterson coughed, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Ryan always had a difficult temperament when he didn't get enough attention from you. And Mariana, well, she took up a lot of your time, Mrs. Adler. You were true friends. I remember he would complain sometimes, say that you trusted a housekeeper more than your own son." The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture Beatrice didn't want to see but could no longer ignore. She dismissed the staff and went up to Ryan's old room, where he hadn't slept in years since moving into his own apartment, but which remained untouched like a time capsule. The room was large and well decorated, with posters of old bands on the walls and shelves full of tennis and swimming trophies. Beatrice began to search methodically, opening drawers, checking closets. She was about to give up when she noticed a loose floorboard at the back of the closet, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. Under the board was a thin, worn, black-covered notebook. Beatrice opened it with trembling hands. The first few pages were innocent. Notes from college classes, phone numbers, meaningless doodles. But then, about halfway through the notebook, the content changed drastically. They were plans, meticulous, detailed, cruel. Ryan had jotted down private conversations he'd overheard by listening at doors, intimate secrets about Beatrice's business, her financial worries, her personal problems. And next to each note were instructions on who to pass the information to, how to make it seem like it came from Mariana, how to build a web of gossip that appeared organic and spontaneous. Beatrice read every page, every poisoned word, feeling nausea rise in her stomach. Her own son, the boy she had raised, loved and protected, had deliberately destroyed an innocent woman's life out of sheer possessive jealousy. There was even a list of people Ryan considered allies in the conspiracy, young socialites he had manipulated into spreading the lies. Every step was documented with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and felt no remorse. Beatrice closed the notebook and held it to her chest, feeling tears of anger and disgust roll down her face. She had believed her own son's lies, had destroyed a true friendship, ruined an entire family's life, and all for what? Because a spoiled young man wanted his mother's exclusive attention? She walked slowly down the stairs, the notebook in her hands, and found Joanna in the garden, looking at the flowers with a sense of wonder. The girl turned at the sound of her footsteps, and her smile vanished when she saw Beatrice's face. "Did you find something?" Beatrice nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was hoarse with emotion. "I found the truth, and it's much worse than I imagined. Your grandmother was the victim of a terrible injustice, and I was foolish enough to believe the lies. But I'm going to fix this, Joanna. No matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs. I will find Mariana, and I will beg for her forgiveness on my knees if I have to. Your grandmother will get her name back, her dignity, everything that was taken from her." Joanna ran to Beatrice and hugged her tightly, and Beatrice returned the embrace, feeling the crushing weight of guilt, but also a steely determination growing in her chest. It was time for justice, no matter who she had to confront in the process, even if it was her own son. Chapter 3. Beatrice scheduled a formal dinner for that very evening. It wasn't a celebration, but a tribunal. She instructed Mrs. Peterson to prepare Ryan's favorite dish, sole in a Sicilian lemon sauce with asparagus risotto, not out of kindness, but because she wanted him comfortable before his world was turned upside down. Dinner would be served at 8 o'clock sharp in the main dining room, with the table set for 3. Ryan arrived punctually, intrigued by his mother's formal invitation. He wore a navy blue suit and brought a bottle of French wine as a gift, clearly trying to ease the tension from the morning. His smile faltered when he saw Joanna seated at the table, wearing a simple but clean dress Beatrice had bought for her that afternoon. "Mum, what's going on here? Why is this child having dinner with us?" Beatrice was seated at the head of the table, and on the white linen tablecloth, perfectly centered between the silver cutlery, lay the black-covered notebook. "Sit down, Ryan." There was something in Beatrice's tone that made Ryan obey immediately, though his eyes remained fixed on the notebook with growing apprehension. Mrs. Peterson served the first course in silence, sensing the tension in the air, and quickly left the room. "Ryan," Beatrice began, her voice calm but laden with restrained emotion, 15 years ago I fired Mariana Morales, my housekeeper and friend, because I believed she was leaking our family's secrets to society. I believed vague testimonies, whispered gossip, coincidences that seemed like evidence. I sent her away without a word of defense, without a proper investigation, trusting only what I was told." Ryan began to cut the fish on, his plate with excessive focus, not looking at his mother. "I remember. It was a difficult situation for all of us. It was difficult, yes, but not for the reasons I thought. Today I discovered that gossip, those carefully planted lies, didn't come from Mariana. They came from you. Ryan dropped his silverware with a metallic clink against the porcelain. His face went pale. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Beatrice opened the notebook to a specific page and began to read aloud, each word falling like a heavy stone in the silent room. "Plan Phase 2. John Marshall is having dinner at Per Se on Friday. Confirm a seat at the same table. Casually mention the company's difficulties, make it sound like I heard it from Mariana. Paula is prepped to spread it to the moms group at school. Richard will tell his father, who's a member of the club. Everything needs to seem organic, as if multiple independent sources are confirming the same story." She turned the page. Phase 3. Intensify. Mariana needs to become persona non grata. Use the charity dinner incident. Make sure Mom hears from at least 5 different sources about the supposed betrayal. She's always too trusting. She'll believe it if enough people tell her. Ryan was now completely white, his hands visibly shaking. "Where did you find that?" "In your old room, under a loose floorboard in the closet. You documented every step of your conspiracy, Ryan. Every lie, every manipulation, every person you used to destroy an innocent woman's reputation. Why? Because you were jealous of my friendship with her? Because you wanted my exclusive attention?" Ryan was silent for a long moment, staring at his own hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You don't understand what it was like, Mom. After Dad passed away, you completely shut me out. Every time I needed you, every time I wanted to talk, you were with Mariana. She knew more about you than I did, your own son. She was your confidant, your friend, while I was treated like an inconvenience, like another item on your to-do list. So you destroyed her life? Her entire family's life?" Beatrice's voice was rising, years of repressed anger and newfound guilt exploding to the surface. "You destroyed an honest, hard-working woman because you felt neglected. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Joanna, who had remained quiet until that moment, spoke for the first time, her voice thin but firm. "My mother is gone because we couldn't afford her medicine. My grandmother disappeared because she couldn't look at herself in the mirror anymore without feeling ashamed. I spent 2 years sleeping on the streets, starving, scared, completely alone in the world. All because you wanted attention?" Ryan looked at the girl, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see what his actions had caused. It wasn't abstract concepts of a tarnished reputation or lost opportunities. It was a real, wounded, traumatized child who had lost her entire family because of his selfish lies. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "I didn't know it would go that far. I thought Mariana would just lose her job, that she'd move to another city and start over. I was 22, I was immature, selfish." Immaturity doesn't justify calculated cruelty, Ryan. You didn't act on impulse. You planned, documented, and orchestrated a systematic smear campaign. And then you watched in silence as I destroyed an innocent woman's life. Beatrice stood up, her posture erect despite her age and emotional exhaustion. "Tomorrow morning, you will go to the office of the best private investigator in New York, and you will hire his services to find Mariana, no matter where she is. You will publicly retract every lie you told. You will write personal letters to every person you manipulated, explaining exactly what you did and completely exonerating Mariana." Ryan opened his mouth to protest, but Beatrice held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You will create a full educational trust for Joanna, covering everything from elementary school through a graduate degree if she wants one. You will pay fair compensation for all the years of work and dignity stolen from Mariana, and you will help her rebuild her life in any way she chooses. And if you refuse any part of this, I will make this notebook public and let New York society judge the man you really are." "But that will ruin my reputation, my career," Ryan protested weakly. "Good. Maybe then you'll understand a fraction of what Mariana felt when she lost everything because of your lies." Ryan looked from his mother to Joanna, seeing for the first time not a threat or an inconvenience, but a real victim of his past actions. The years had passed, he had matured, built a respectable career, and liked to think he had become a better man. But that notebook, those words written in his own hand, were undeniable proof of who he had really been. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, there were tears there, perhaps the first genuine tears of remorse he had shed in his adult life. "You're right, Mom. About everything. I was a selfish monster, and Mariana and her family paid the price for my cruel immaturity. I'll do everything you've asked. Not because of the threat of exposure, but because it's the very least I owe this girl and her grandmother." He turned to Joanna, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "I know my words mean nothing right now, and I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. But I want you to know that I will dedicate the rest of my life to trying to fix the terrible mistake I made. Your grandmother was a good woman, and everything that happened to your family is my fault and mine alone." Joanna watched him for a long moment, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. She was too young to carry so much weight, to have to decide on forgiveness and justice. But she had been forced to grow up too fast on the streets of New York, and there was a wounded wisdom in her gaze that shouldn't belong to a 10-year-old child. "I don't want your forgiveness or your apologies right now," she said finally. "I want my grandmother back. I want her to know it wasn't her fault, that she was always the good person she thought she was. If you can give me that, then maybe one day we can talk about forgiveness." Ryan nodded, unable to speak. Beatrice placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and protection. "Tomorrow, we begin the search. I will also hire a labor rights attorney to calculate fair compensation. And Ryan, I want you personally involved in every step of this process. You will not delegate this to assistants or lawyers. You will look into the eyes of every person you deceived, and you will tell the truth." "Yes, Mom." The dinner ended in silence, the fish growing cold on the nearly untouched plates. When Ryan left that night, he looked as if he had aged 10 years. The weight of his guilt and the responsibility for the suffering he had caused had finally hit him, and he staggered as he got into his car, like a man carrying an invisible but crushing burden. Beatrice and Joanna remained in the living room after he left. The girl rested her head on the older woman's shoulder, and Beatrice gently stroked her hair. "Do you think we'll find her?" Joanna asked in a low voice. "We will," Beatrice answered with conviction. "No matter how long it takes, no matter where she is, we will bring her back home, for you, for justice, and because it's the right thing to do." That night, Beatrice called the best private investigator in New York, a man named Richard Taylor, known for finding people who didn't want to be found. He answered on the second ring, and Beatrice explained the situation in detail. Richard listened intently, and by the time she finished, he was already asking technical questions about Mariana's last known addresses, her skills, possible places she might have taken refuge. "I'll find your friend, Mrs. Adler," Richard promised. "I have experience with cases of people who disappear to start a new life. There are usually patterns, choices that make sense when you understand the person. Give me a few days to begin the investigation." "Money is no object," Beatrice said. "Just find her. And Richard, when you do find her, be gentle. She has been deeply hurt and may not want to be found. But she needs to know the truth. She needs to know her granddaughter is looking for her." "Understood. I'll start tomorrow morning." When Beatrice finally went to bed that night, it was well past 2 in the morning. But for the first time in 15 years, she slept without the unconscious weight of an unresolved injustice. The truth had emerged, terrible and liberating, and now there was a clear path forward, however difficult it might be to walk it. Chapter 4. 3 weeks had passed since that tense dinner. Joanna had settled completely into the Adler mansion, transforming the guest room into a small sanctuary of hope. On the walls, she had taped up old photos of Mariana that Beatrice had kept over the years, images from a happier time when the housekeeper smiled freely, holding their baby Joanna in her arms, or helping decorate for parties at the mansion. The girl looked at them every night before bed, whispering promises of a reunion. Ryan had kept his word meticulously and painfully. He personally visited each of the friends he had manipulated 15 years ago, some now married with children, others still single but all established in their careers. The conversations were awkward and revealing. Many didn't remember the details. They had simply followed the lead of the young Ryan at the time without question. Others, when confronted with the truth, expressed genuine horror at having participated in the destruction of an innocent woman's reputation. John Marshall, now a respected lawyer, was particularly shaken. He vividly remembered the dinner at Per Se, how convincing Ryan had been, making it seem as though the information about the Adler family's financial difficulties came from a reliable source. John had passed the information to his father, who in turn spread it at the club, and thus the lie took on a life of its own. "I want to do something to help," John told Ryan, his voice thick with guilt. "I'm going to write a public letter to the major New York newspapers, explaining my part in this injustice and asking everyone who participated to do the same." Each letter of retraction Ryan sent was like tearing out a piece of himself, exposing his youthful weaknesses and cruelties to public judgment. But he persisted, driven not only by his mother's demand, but by a growing weight of moral responsibility. Seeing Joanna every day at the mansion, watching how she still flinched at sudden noises, how she hoarded food under her pillow in the first few days for fear of going hungry again, all of it made it impossible to ignore the real consequences of his past actions. Meanwhile, the investigator Richard Taylor worked tirelessly. He started at Mariana's last known residence, a small apartment in Queens she had rented before disappearing. The landlady remembered her well, a quiet, sad woman who always paid her rent on time, but seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. "She left one morning with just a small suitcase," the landlady told Richard. "Said she was going to look for work upstate, that she needed a fresh start away from New York City. She didn't leave a forwarding address." Richard then checked bus records, spoke with drivers on regular routes, and showed Mariana's photo at dozens of ticket counters and diners along the major highways. It was tedious work, but finally, in a small town called Pine Ridge, in upstate New York, a ticket agent remembered her. "This lady came through here about 2 years ago," she said, pointing to the photo. "Bought a ticket to a town near the Vermont border. I remember because she was crying softly while she waited for the bus. I offered her some water, but she just thanked me and said she was fine." Pine Ridge was a small, picturesque town known for its mountain scenery and cold weather. Richard traveled there immediately, taking Mariana's photo and an unshakable determination with him. He visited inns, restaurants, local markets, showing the photo to anyone who would stop to talk. It was in a bakery in the center of town that he finally got a solid lead. The owner, Tony, a sturdy man with graying hair and floured hands, looked at the photo for a long time before nodding slowly. "I know this woman. She doesn't go by Mariana here, she uses the name Maria." Showed up in town about 2 years ago, asking for work in exchange for room and board. "I needed someone to help clean the bakery in the early morning, so I took her on. She lives in a little room out back." Richard felt his heart race. After weeks of searching, he had finally found Mariana. "Can I speak with her?" Tony looked at the investigator suspiciously. "Depends. Who are you, and what do you want with her? Maria's a good person, keeps to herself, never caused any trouble. I won't let anyone bother her." Richard carefully explained the situation, omitting the most painful details, but making it clear that Mariana was not in danger, that in fact there were people in New York City desperate to find her and right a past wrong. Tony listened with growing attention, and when Richard mentioned Joanna, the granddaughter who was looking for her grandmother, the baker's eyes filled with tears. "That child, Maria talks about her in moments when she thinks no one is listening. She cries in her little room sometimes, whispering her granddaughter's name, but she always said it was for the best, that the girl deserved a chance without carrying the weight of a failed grandmother." "She's not a failure," Richard said firmly. "She's a woman who was deeply wronged, and it's time she knew the truth." Tony agreed to help. He led Richard to the back of the bakery, where there was a simple room with a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a window overlooking a tiny but well-tended garden. Mariana was there, folding clean clothes, and when she turned at the sound of the door opening, Richard saw a woman completely different from the one in the old photos. Mariana had short grey hair, her face thin, and marked with worry lines. She wore simple, clean but well-worn clothes. However, what struck Richard most was the expression in her eyes, a mixture of resignation and deep sadness, as if she had given up hope that anything good could ever happen in her life. "Maria," Tony said gently, "this gentleman came from New York City. He needs to talk to you about something important." Mariana recoiled instinctively, her eyes widening with fear. "I haven't done anything wrong here. I work, honestly, I pay my bills. Please, I didn't come to this town to cause trouble." Richard held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Mrs. Morales, I know who you are, and I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because your granddaughter, Joanna, is in New York looking for you, and because there are people who desperately need to ask for your forgiveness for a terrible injustice they committed 15 years ago." Upon hearing Joanna's name, Mariana nearly collapsed. She leaned against the wall, her hand on her chest, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "Joanna? Is my Joanna okay? Where is she? Who is she with?" "She's safe, staying at Beatrice Adler's home. Your former employer found out the truth about what really happened 15 years ago, and she's determined to see justice done." Mariana shook her head vigorously, tears now streaming freely down her face. "No, that can't be. Mrs. Adler despised me. She believed I was a traitor, a gossip. Why would she be helping my granddaughter? Because she discovered the accusations were lies, all of them, and because she desperately wants to ask for your forgiveness in person." Richard spent the next 20 minutes telling the full story, from the moment Joanna recognized the ring at the hospital to the discovery of Ryan's notebook. Mariana listened in silence, going through waves of shock, anger, sadness, and finally, a kind of exhausted relief. "So it wasn't me," she whispered when Richard finished. "All these years, I carried the guilt. I thought maybe I had said something by accident, shared some secret without realizing it. I died inside thinking I had betrayed the trust of the one person who truly respected me. You were the victim of a cruel conspiracy, and everyone involved knows it now. Ryan Adler is personally retracting every lie he told. Newspapers are publishing retractions. Your reputation is being restored. But none of that matters if you don't come back. Joanna needs you, Mrs. Morales. That little girl spent 2 years on the streets looking for her grandmother, and now she's in a mansion in New York, waiting, praying that you'll be found." Mariana covered her face with her hands and wept, years of pent-up pain finally finding release. Tony approached and placed a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "Maria, you have to go. This is your chance to get your family back, your dignity, your life. We'll miss you here, but your place is with your granddaughter." Mariana nodded through her tears, unable to speak. Richard took out his phone and called Beatrice immediately. "I've found Mariana. She's in Pine Ridge, New York, and she's willing to come back. Can you come get her?" On the other end of the line, Richard heard a muffled cry of joy, then Beatrice's emotional voice. "We'll be there tomorrow morning. Thank you, Richard. You have no idea what this means to us." That night, in New York, Beatrice told Joanna that the investigator had found her grandmother. The girl froze for a moment, as if she couldn't process the information, then burst into tears, hugging Beatrice so tightly that the older woman almost lost her balance. "Is she okay? Is she coming back? Does she want to see me?" "She's okay, and she wants to see you very much. We're going to drive up early tomorrow to get her. Pack a small bag, dear. You're going to see your grandmother again." Joanna barely slept that night, alternating between excitement and nervousness. What if her grandmother was angry with her? What if 15 years had changed them both too much? But above all, there was a fierce, bright hope burning in her chest, the first spark of true joy she had felt in 2 long, lonely years. Chapter 5. The drive from New York City to Pine Ridge took about 4 hours, but for Joanna, it felt like an eternity. She sat in the back of Beatrice's Mercedes, with Miller at the wheel, staring out the window as the urban landscape gradually gave way to green mountains and smaller towns. Beatrice watched the girl with motherly concern, noticing how her small hands clenched and unclenched the fabric of the new dress she had insisted on wearing for the reunion. Ryan had asked to accompany them, but Beatrice had firmly refused. This moment was for Joanna and Mariana, and the presence of the man responsible for the whole tragedy would only make things more difficult. There would be time for confrontations and reckonings, but not now. Now was a time for healing. When they finally arrived in Pine Ridge, the town was just as Richard had described, small and picturesque, with cobblestone streets and preserved colonial houses. Tony's Bakery was in the historic center, an old but well-maintained building with a simple sign that read Tony's Bakery in faded red letters. Richard was waiting for them. Outside, and upon seeing the car approach, he signaled for Miller to stop. He approached Beatrice's window with a serious expression. "Mariana is very nervous," he warned in a low voice. "She barely slept last night, kept rehearsing what to say to her granddaughter. I ask that you be patient with her. It's 15 years of trauma, of undeserved guilt, of loneliness. That doesn't heal overnight." Beatrice nodded in understanding. "We understand. We'll do this on her time." Joanna, however, couldn't contain her anxiety. As soon as the car came to a complete stop, she opened the door and ran toward the bakery. Beatrice tried to call her back, but the girl had already disappeared through the shop's door. Mariana was sitting in a chair at the back of the bakery, wearing a simple but neat dress that Tony had insisted on buying for her the day before. Her hands trembled in her lap, and she stared intently at the door, hardly daring to breathe. When Joanna ran in, time seemed to stand still. For an endless moment, grandmother and granddaughter simply looked at each other, their eyes bridging the 2 years of separation, of pain, of impossible longing. Then Joanna ran, her bare feet pattering on the wooden floor, and threw herself into Mariana's arms with such force that she nearly knocked over the chair. "Grandma, Grandma, Grandma," Joanna repeated like a mantra, her face buried in Mariana's neck, her tears soaking her grandmother's dress. Mariana hugged her granddaughter with desperate strength, as if fearing she would disappear if she loosened her grip. She smelled Joanna's hair, now clean and smelling of children's shampoo, and cried openly, years of pent-up tears finally finding an outlet. "My girl, my precious Joanna," Mariana whispered between sobs. "Forgive this foolish grandmother. Forgive me for abandoning you, for being too cowardly to face my own shame. You don't have to ask for forgiveness, Grandma. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault. I know the truth now. Everyone knows the truth." They remained embraced for long minutes, oblivious to everything around them. Tears streamed down Tony's bearded face, and even Richard, a hardened investigator who had seen it all in his career, had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Beatrice entered the bakery slowly, allowing the reunion to unfold before making her presence known. When Mariana finally looked up and saw her former employer, her face went through a series of complex emotions: fear, anger, confusion, and finally, a wounded caution. "Mrs. Adler," Mariana said, her voice hoarse from crying. Beatrice approached slowly, as if afraid of startling Mariana. When she was just a few steps away, she did something completely unexpected and unthinkable for a woman of her social standing. She knelt on the dusty bakery floor, her hands clasped in a gesture of supplication. "Mariana, there are not enough words to express my regret, my shame for what I did to you. I believed lies. I destroyed a true friendship. I ruined your life and your family's without a proper investigation, without giving you a chance to defend yourself. I spent 15 years believing a false version of events, while you suffered the terrible consequences of an injustice I helped perpetuate." Mariana looked at Beatrice kneeling before her, and the sight of that powerful woman, always so dignified and proud, prostrated on the floor of a humble bakery, begging for forgiveness, was almost too much to process. "Get up, Mrs. Adler, please get up. No, not until you hear me out completely. My son Ryan planned everything. He was jealous of our friendship, of the time we spent together. At just 22, he orchestrated a systematic smear campaign against you, documenting every lie he spread, manipulating our acquaintances to corroborate his false story. I found the notebook where he recorded everything, and I, fool that I was, believed him without question." Mariana's expression shifted from surprise to a cold anger. "Ryan did that? The boy I helped raise, whom I protected so many times from his own foolishness? He destroyed my life out of jealousy?" Beatrice nodded miserably. "Yes, and he is now correcting every lie, publicly retracting, contacting every person he manipulated. He will compensate you for all the lost years. He will create an educational trust for Joanna. But none of that erases the suffering we caused. None of that brings your daughter back." At the mention of her daughter, Mariana's face contorted with pain. Joanna squeezed her grandmother's hand, offering the only comfort she could. Mariana was silent for a long moment, looking at the woman kneeling before her. Finally, she reached out and touched Beatrice's shoulder. "Get up, Mrs. Adler. Your humility is more than I ever expected, more than I ever imagined I would receive. But I need time. 15 years is a long time to carry a guilt that wasn't mine, to believe I had betrayed the only person who trusted me. I can't just forget all that suffering because I now know the truth." Beatrice rose with difficulty, her knees aching from the uncomfortable position, and nodded in understanding. "I don't expect your immediate forgiveness, Mariana. I only ask for the chance to try to fix, as much as possible, the damage we caused. Come back to New York with us, not to work, but to rebuild your life with dignity. Joanna needs you, and you deserve to have your granddaughter back. You deserve to reclaim your name, your reputation, everything that was unjustly taken from you." Mariana looked at Joanna, who was watching her with hopeful eyes, and felt her heart break and mend at the same time. For 2 years, she had lived with the crushing weight of believing she had failed her family, that her granddaughter was better off without her. Now, to discover that it had all been an elaborate lie, that she had always been the person of integrity she believed herself to be, was simultaneously liberating and devastating. "I'll come back," she said finally. "Not for you, Mrs. Adler, but for Joanna. She deserves to have a grandmother. She deserves to grow up knowing she wasn't abandoned by choice, but by circumstances created by other people's lies." Beatrice nodded, accepting the implicit rejection with a painful grace. She deserved that, and much more. The drive back to New York was completely different from the trip up. Joanna was nestled beside Mariana in the back seat, holding her hand as if afraid she would disappear if she let go. They spoke in whispers, Joanna telling her about the 2 years on the streets, Mariana talking about her work at the bakery, both filling in the empty spaces left by their forced separation. Beatrice, sitting in the front seat next to Miller, watched them in the rearview mirror, her heart tight with a mixture of relief and remorse. She had gotten Mariana back, but the friendship they once had was irrevocably broken, and Beatrice wasn't sure if it could ever be rebuilt. When they arrived at the mansion, it was already night. Ryan was waiting in the living room, having been informed by Beatrice of their expected arrival time. When he saw Mariana enter, accompanied by Joanna, he stood up abruptly, his face paling. Mariana looked at the man who had been a boy when she left the mansion, and she saw in him the traces of the spoiled, temperamental youth she had known, but also something new, a weight of guilt and remorse that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Adler," she said, her voice cold and controlled. Ryan took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure he had the right to approach. "Mariana, he began, then stopped, the words failing him. How could he summarize 15 years of consequences in a few sentences? How could he adequately express the horror he felt upon realizing the extent of the suffering he had caused? Mariana held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want your apologies right now, Mr. Adler. I want you to listen, really listen to what your lies caused. But not today. Today I just want to be with my granddaughter and process everything that has happened." Ryan nodded, accepting the rejection as the penance it was. He turned to Beatrice. "I've prepared Mariana's old room. It's exactly as she left it, except I had it cleaned and put on fresh linens. I thought she might like something familiar." For the first time since she had arrived, Mariana seemed genuinely touched. She gave Ryan a brief nod, a small acknowledgement that he was at least trying, and followed Mrs. Peterson to her old room on the second floor. The room was exactly as she remembered, with the single bed, the dark wood wardrobe, the window overlooking the back garden. But now there were fresh flowers in a vase on the nightstand, and on the bed, carefully folded, was the quilt she had embroidered. Herself years ago, a relic of a happier time. Mariana sat on the bed, running her hand over the embroidered quilt, and Joanna sat beside her, For the first time in 2 years, they both felt something they had forgotten, the feeling of being home, of belonging, of no longer being alone in the world. And though the road ahead was uncertain and full of difficulties, at that moment, in that room, bathed in the soft moonlight streaming through the window, they had each other. And that was all that mattered. Chapter 6. The first few months after Mariana's return to the mansion were complex and emotionally turbulent. She insisted from the beginning that she would not return as an employee, but as a guest in the process of rebuilding her life. Beatrice accepted without question, offering the room and all amenities without expecting anything in return except the chance, perhaps one day, to rebuild the friendship they had lost. Ryan fulfilled every one of his promises with an almost obsessive diligence. The public retraction was published in major New York newspapers, causing a considerable scandal in social circles. Ryan Adler, respected businessman and son of magnate Beatrice Adler, admitted to orchestrating a smear campaign against an innocent employee when he was 22. New York society reacted with shock, outrage, and to Ryan's surprise, some with understanding, sharing their own stories of youthful mistakes and late regrets. But the real test came when Ryan finally sat down to talk with Mariana, a week after her return. They met in Beatrice's study, with Joanna present at Mariana's insistence. The girl had the right to hear, to fully understand what had happened to her family. Ryan started from the beginning, describing in painful detail his immaturity, his possessive jealousy, his inability to share, his mother's attention. He spoke of how he had planned every step, manipulated every person, built a web of lies so convincing that even he had started to believe it at times. Mariana listened in silence, her face a mask of control, but her eyes betraying the storm of emotions behind it. When Ryan got to the part about the consequences, about how the lies had spread beyond his control, making it impossible for Mariana to find decent work, she finally spoke. "Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up every day knowing your name is synonymous with betrayal in the circles where you've worked your entire life? Can you imagine the humiliation of being turned down for cleaning jobs, because even for that, my name was tarnished? I, who had always been a person of integrity, hard-working, honest, was suddenly not even trustworthy enough to clean toilets." Her voice was steady, but there was a deep pain in every word. "My daughter, Joanna's mother, got sick. She had a treatable condition, but we needed imported medications that cost a fortune. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously, night cleaning, elderly care, anything that paid, but it was never enough. And I watched my daughter waste away day after day, knowing that if I still had my reputation, if I still had the connections I had when I worked here, I could have gotten help. I could have saved her." Joanna squeezed her grandmother's hand, silent tears rolling down her face as she heard details of her mother's tragedy she had never fully known. Ryan was pale, his breathing labored. "Mariana, he began, but there were no adequate words. How could you apologize for indirectly causing the loss of a life? How could you quantify that kind of guilt?" "Don't come to me with empty apologies," Mariana interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. "I want you to understand, truly understand, that your actions had real consequences. A woman lost her life because we didn't have the resources to treat her properly. A child spent 2 years on the streets facing dangers no child should ever face. I, a woman who always took pride in her dignity and honesty, spent 15 years believing I had betrayed someone who trusted me. Those are the real consequences of your youthful lies, Mr. Adler." Ryan nodded, tears now streaming freely down. His face, the veneer of corporate control, completely gone. "You're right, completely right, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to compensate for the incompensable, but I need you to know that this isn't just a performance to appease my guilt. I've created a foundation, the Domestic Workers Protection Institute, dedicated to providing legal and financial assistance to workers facing situations of injustice like yours. We've already helped 14 families in the last 2 months. Joanna's educational trust is established and irrevocable, guaranteeing her education through graduate school, if she wants it. And the compensation, Mariana, has Been deposited into an account in your name, with 15 years of retroactive interest." He slid an envelope across the desk. Mariana opened it with trembling hands and looked at the documents inside. The amount was substantial, more money than she would have earned in several lifetimes of honest work. There were also property deeds, a fully paid-for apartment in her name in a good New York neighborhood, and documents for a robust retirement fund. "This is all I can offer materially," Ryan continued, his voice hoarse. "But I also want to offer something more personal. I've been in intensive therapy. Since the truth came out, working with a psychologist to understand and change the behavioral patterns that led me to commit something so cruel. I'm not doing this to ask for your forgiveness. You don't owe me that. I'm doing it because I need to become a better man, someone my own conscience can bear to look at in the mirror." Mariana put the documents back in the envelope and set it aside. She looked at Ryan for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer, though still laden with pain. "I can't forgive you now, Mr. Adler. Perhaps I never can completely, but I recognize that you are trying to do what's right in the way you can. It doesn't erase the past, but it shows there is at least an awareness of the wrong. For Joanna, for her chance to grow up without carrying the weight of hatred and resentment, I choose to accept your attempt at reparation. But don't mistake acceptance for forgiveness. That, if it comes, will take a very long time." Ryan nodded, accepting the decision with a humble grace that was new to him. "I understand and respect that, thank you, for at least hearing me out." In the following months, a strange but functional routine was established at the Adler mansion. Mariana used part of the compensation to fulfill an old dream she had long since buried: opening an artisanal bakery. She chose a commercial space in Greenwich Village, a bohemian and welcoming neighborhood, and invested not just money, but all her repressed passion into the business. The Fresh Start Bakery, as she named it, quickly gained a reputation for the exceptional quality of its breads, cakes, and traditional pastries. Mariana woke up at 3 every morning to personally prepare each batch, finding in the therapy of manual labor a way to process all her accumulated trauma. Beatrice was her first customer and most fervent promoter. She brought her high society friends to sample the products, and while some initially came only out of morbid curiosity, wanting to see the woman at the center of the Adler scandal, they all left impressed with the quality and returned as regular customers. During one of these breakfasts at the bakery, one of Beatrice's friends, Margaret Silverstein, approached Mariana as she was bagging bread. "Mariana, I need to apologize personally. I was one of those who believed and spread the rumors about you 15 years ago. I had no proof. I just repeated what I heard, without thinking of the consequences. I was foolish and cruel, and I ask for your forgiveness." Others followed suit, in an impromptu line of regrets and apologies. Mariana accepted each one with dignity, without rancor, but also without the easy forgiveness some expected. She understood that many of them were as much victims of Ryan's manipulation as she was, but that didn't erase the fact that they had participated in her destruction. Joanna flourished under the combined care of Mariana and Beatrice. She was enrolled in an excellent private school, where she initially struggled to adapt, but gradually integrated. A child psychologist worked with her twice a week, helping her process the trauma of living on the streets and the loss of her mother. Curiously, it was the relationship between Mariana and Beatrice that took the longest to heal. They lived in the same house, saw each other daily, but there was a painful formality in their interactions. Beatrice respected Mariana's space, never pushing for more intimacy than she was willing to offer. It was Joanna who finally forced a deeper reconciliation. One day, 6 months after Mariana's return, the girl had an anxiety attack at school, reliving memories of the streets. The principal called Mariana, who was at the bakery, and Beatrice, who was in a business meeting. Both dropped everything and rushed to the school. They arrived simultaneously, finding Joanna huddled in a room, trembling and crying. Without thinking, Mariana and Beatrice knelt on either side of the girl, hugging her together, forming a protective shield of love and security around her. Joanna gradually calmed down, anchored by the presence of the two women who were now her grandmothers, one by blood and one by heart. In that moment, something broke between Mariana and Beatrice. The carefully maintained barriers began to crumble. In the following days, they started talking more openly, not about the past, but about the present and future, about their fears for Joanna, about the challenges of raising her, about the dreams they had for this extraordinary girl who had survived so much. Slowly, cautiously, they rebuilt their friendship, not as it was before because that was impossible, but as something new, stronger for having been tested and broken and reassembled. It was a friendship, built not on the dynamic of employer and employee, but on mutual respect and equality. Ryan, for his part, found his own path to redemption. The Domestic Workers Protection Institute grew rapidly, helping hundreds of families. He dedicated most of his time to the foundation, working personally on each case, listening to stories of injustice that echoed Mariana's. In every life he helped rebuild, he found a small piece of peace. His relationship with Joanna developed slowly. The girl was wary of him at first, seeing him as the villain of her family's story. But Ryan didn't give up. He attended her school recitals, her parent-teacher conferences, always respectful, always present, never demanding affection, but always offering support. Over time, Joanna began to see him not as the monster who had destroyed her family, but as a flawed man genuinely trying to fix his mistakes. Years passed. Joanna grew from a traumatized girl into a confident teenager, and then into a brilliant young woman. She chose to study law, inspired by the work of Ryan's foundation and her determination to help other vulnerable people fight for justice. Throughout this time, Mariana and Beatrice remained close, their relationship maturing into something deep and unshakable. The bakery thrived, expanding to 2 additional locations, all personally managed by Mariana. She became a minor celebrity in the New York culinary world, not for her scandalous past, but for the exceptional quality of her products and her inspiring story of a fresh start. Ryan never stopped his work of reparation. The Institute grew, added new programs, including an emergency fund for medication, directly inspired by the tragedy of Mariana's family. He never asked for recognition or gratitude, doing the work quietly, knowing that no amount of good deeds would ever completely erase his past mistake. And then came the day of Joanna's graduation from the NYU School of Law. The auditorium was packed with Mariana and Beatrice sitting side by side in the front row, Ryan seated discreetly a few rows back. Joanna had been chosen as the class speaker, an honor reserved for the student with the best academic performance and greatest contribution to the student community. She walked onto the stage wearing the traditional black gown, her face radiating confidence and purpose. When she began to speak, her voice was clear and strong, filling the auditorium. Fellow graduates, professors, family, and friends, today, I speak not just as a representative of our class, but as a living witness to the transformative power of justice, forgiveness, and redemption. My journey to this stage did not begin in a comfortable classroom or a well-stocked library. It began on the streets of New York, where I spent 2 years of my childhood alone, hungry and afraid, but always carrying a stubborn hope that there was justice somewhere in the world. The audience fell completely silent, captivated by her words. My story could have ended on the streets. Statistically, it should have, but it didn't, because 3 people made choices that changed everything. A brave child, myself, who refused to give up on finding her grandmother, a ring kept as a promise of a better past. A powerful woman, Beatrice Adler, who, when confronted with an uncomfortable truth, chose justice over convenience and humility over pride. And a man, Ryan Adler, who made a terrible mistake in his youth and then chose the harder path, not of hiding his shame, but of facing it, repairing it, and transforming it into something that could help others. Ryan felt tears sting his eyes the first time Joanna had spoken publicly about his role with anything other than condemnation. I learned that justice is not just about punishing the wrong, but about correcting what can be corrected, rebuilding what was broken. I learned from my grandmother, Mariana, that dignity comes not from never falling, but from choosing to get up every day even when the world pushes you down. I learned from Beatrice that true humility is acknowledging your mistakes, even when you have the power to hide them. And I learned from Ryan that redemption is not a moment but a lifelong process, a daily choice to do better, to be better. She paused, looking directly at the front row where Mariana and Beatrice were clearly emotional. "I have two grandmothers here today. One gave me life, unconditional love, and the resilience that allowed me to survive. The other gave me justice, opportunity, and the proof that it is never too late to do the right thing. Together they gave me a home, not defined by the walls of a house, but by love, respect, and a commitment to always be better than we were yesterday. And I also have a man here who taught me the hardest lesson of all, that people are complex, capable of great cruelty and great kindness, sometimes the same person at different times in their lives. That to condemn someone forever for their worst moments is to deny them the possibility of growth that we all deserve. Ryan, your actions 15 years ago were inexcusable, but your actions over the last 8 years have shown that you understood, that you changed, that you chose to dedicate your life to fixing what you broke. That, too, is justice." Ryan covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beside him, an older woman he didn't know gently placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort from a stranger moved by the story. Joanna finished her speech with a plea for her class to embrace the complexity of justice, to work not just to punish, but to restore, to heal, to transform. When she finished, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. After the ceremony, there was a small reception in the university garden. Mariana and Beatrice were talking with Joanna's professors when Ryan approached hesitantly. The three women turned to him, and for a moment time seemed to stop. "Ryan," Mariana said, finally her voice soft. "Joanna's speech was beautiful but also far too generous to you. You know that, right?" "I know," Ryan replied. "I will never forget what I did, and I will never stop trying to make up for it. But Mariana, I want you to know that the work of the Institute, helping these families, it's not forced penance, it's genuine. Every life we help, I see you, I see Joanna, and I am grateful that you gave me the chance to do better." Mariana nodded slowly. Then, to everyone's surprise, including her own, she extended her hand. Ryan took it, shaking it with silent gratitude. It wasn't complete forgiveness, perhaps it never would be, but it was acknowledgement. It was a start. Beatrice watched the scene with tears in her eyes, marveling at the resilience of the human spirit, at the capacity to heal such deep wounds. She looked at Joanna, who was chatting animatedly with her classmates, and felt a profound gratitude that this girl had burst into her life that day at the hospital, forcing her to face uncomfortable truths and, in the process, saving not only Mariana and Joanna, but Beatrice herself from a life built on lies. That night back at the mansion, the four of them, Beatrice, Mariana, Ryan and Joanna, sat together in the garden under the stars. They were not a traditional family, bound by blood. They were something more complex and perhaps more precious. People who had been broken together and had chosen to rebuild themselves together, transforming pain into purpose, error into redemption, loss into rebirth. They had proven that it was never too late to right the past and build a worthy future. That true justice included not only punishment, but the sacred possibility of redemption, and that love in all its imperfect and complicated forms could heal even the deepest of wounds. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Beatrice, Mariana, Ryan and Joanna has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours in telling it. This narrative reminds us that true justice goes beyond punishment, also embracing the possibility of redemption, and that it's never too late to correct the mistakes of the past. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel to follow more narratives that explore the complexity of human nature, the strength of forgiveness, and the transformative power of unconditional love. Leave a like if the journey of this unlikely family moved you, and share your own reflections on redemption, forgiveness, and second chances in the comments. Every day we bring you stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity we all have to be better than we were yesterday. Until the next story, and remember, never underestimate the power of acknowledging a mistake and truly dedicating yourself to correcting it. See you in the comments.